Hi, I'm Crystal, the parenting coach. Parenting is a thing that some of us just expected to know how to do. It's not like other areas of your life where you go to school and get taught, get on-the-job training, or have mentors to help you. But now you can get that help here. I believe that your relationship with your children is one of the most important aspects of your life and the best way that you can make a positive impact on the world and on the future. I've made parental relationships my life study, and I use life coaching tools, emotional wellness tools, and connection-based parenting to build amazing relationships between parents and their children. If you want an even better relationship with your child, this podcast will help you. Take my parenting quiz at the link in the show notes. Once we know what your parenting style is, we will send some tips tailored to you and a roadmap to help you get the most out of my podcast. Welcome to today's podcast episode, the one for new moms with Dr. Erin Appleton, MD. Did you feel entirely unprepared for new momhood with your first child? Or maybe you're currently prepping for that experience and looking for some support? Dr. Erin Appleton joins me on the podcast today to discuss the big things: breastfeeding and infant feeding in general, postpartum anxiety and depression, and the trauma that mothers deal with when delivery and postpartum are so vastly different than the plan. Dr. Appleton discovered her passion for breastfeeding after enrolling in specialized courses in breastfeeding support while completing her Bachelor of Science in Nursing. In 2012, she began her breastfeeding medicine training, eventually co-founding the Nurture Family Feeding Clinic, and in 2014 became an international board-certified lactation consultant. In 2018, she became one of only a few hundred MDs in the world with a fellowship in the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. While she's proud of her education, training, and experience, she believes that some of her most valuable lessons have been firsthand with her own personal struggles with feeding her children and with helping the thousands of new families she's seen over the past decade of her career. In today's conversation, we're going to cover all of the common breastfeeding issues, how to prepare yourself, what to do for all of that. We talk about latching, all the things. We also talk in detail about postpartum depression and anxiety signs, because oftentimes it doesn't look like what you think it looks like, and how to know if you need help and what to do to reach out. We also talk about that gap between what we plan for in birth and postpartum and what actually happens and how painful that can be, just like in my first birth experience. And we discuss Dr. Appleton's personal journey with her own babies and nursing, and also mine and how we met. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Parenting Coach podcast. If you have not yet had a chance to check out Parent School, that is still going on, and we would love to have you join. As well, if you're enjoying this podcast, go and rate and review and subscribe and all the things. I'm excited for this episode for several reasons, but we'll get into that. First, I'm going to introduce my guest to you, Dr. Erin Appleton. Erin, do you want to just give us a little introduction about who you are and what you do?
For sure. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Dr. Erin Appleton. I am a family doctor, and I am an international board certified lactation consultant and fellow of the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. I've been practicing breastfeeding medicine pretty much exclusively for the last 12 years of my career, and it has brought me immense joy. It has been the most fulfilling part of my medical career, and I truly love what I do day in and day out, helping families to feel that they have completed a nurturing and loving feeding relationship, whether that means that they end up exclusively breastfeeding, exclusively pumping, exclusively formula feeding, and helping them to feel that they have really gotten what they want out of the journey, while also maintaining their mental health and a fed is first mentality. So that's where my...
Yes.
Yeah, that's where my most important kind of aspect of care really evolved from, was feeling like when I was breastfeeding my first, that I was somehow failing as a person, as a being, and I didn't reach my breastfeeding goals, and that was really difficult, and it impacted my future feedings for my next two kids, and my feeding journeys with them were also quite difficult and probably tainted with a fair amount of anxiety and PTSD around feeding. Yeah. And my goal with kind of working with moms has been to help alleviate at least some of that fear and anxiety that comes from feeding and not feeling like you're maybe reaching the goals that you had set out for yourself with feeding.
Oh, 100%. I feel like you just explained my first experience with breastfeeding for sure. But first of all, I want to mention one of the reasons for all of your listeners that I'm excited for this is because this is actually my doctor. I guess like not currently because I'm not breastfeeding currently, but in real life, I feel like most of the people that I have on the podcast are like virtual friends that I know, but not very often do I get to have someone on the podcast that I know physically in person from my own town. So I'm excited about this. So I started seeing the breastfeeding clinic when I think on my third. So like he's almost 11. So almost 11 years ago. And it made a massive difference, the third and the fourth breastfeeding journey compared to the first and the second, where I didn't have support. And the support that I did find was not helpful. And with my first, like you said, I ended up nursing, did not work out, it just didn't happen. And I didn't even think it was going to be hard. So I think part of it was this expectation of like, I guess I thought breastfeeding was just going to be easy and we'd figure it out. And like, that's just what people do. Nobody really talked about that to me. And so again, for sure felt like this massive failure. Like, how could I? And like added on to that, I thought I was going to have this like lovely, amazing natural birth and ended up in an emergency C-section and was in the hospital for like a week. And I was like, wait, this is supposed to be very different than it was.
Natural, easy.
Yeah, definitely some PTSD type things from both of those experiences. But the reason I wanted to bring you on is because I think that with this being a parenting podcast, oftentimes I focus on kids, like kind of what my kids are going through and like their ages and their stages. And so I don't talk a lot about toddlers and I don't talk a lot about babies and I don't talk a lot about postpartum. But that's such a huge part of parenting. And so I think kind of gearing this conversation towards like what moms, and by young moms, I mean like moms with really young kids, need to know so that they don't end up in that same situation, because it took me years to unravel that, like that everything that had happened within that time of having this ideal situation, and not even that it was ideal because it was, but I also just didn't even, there was no room for like, it's not going to be that way. I didn't even know enough people to know that there was actually like a lot of ways that birth and pregnancy and all of that could go. So I kind of just thought, it was like a shoo-in. I was like, oh, I'm going to have this lovely natural birth. I'm going to nurse this baby forever. And because I grew up with people that had done that, my mom and my aunts all nursed their babies for years, like actually lots of years, and had natural births and never really talked about it being hard, I guess. So I kind of just thought, of course it's going to happen for me too. And then when it didn't, just that, like really that shame of like, what's wrong with me that I can't do this? And kind of just like keeping that under the surface and hidden and not really talked about it for a long time until I learned about emotional wellness. And here we are. But okay, so I would love for you just to kind of talk a little bit about that expectation and how it affects your mental health and whatnot.
I think we are all prepared for labor. That is kind of how everybody in pregnancy has their education geared. That's what we think as women that we need to know. And we go to prenatal classes and we see birthing and we do Lamaze and we have breathing and we know that this big event is coming. And boy, we have to be prepared for that. So we get as prepared as we can. And nobody talks about how to prepare for the longest and sometimes biggest journey that comes after that. And so being prepared for not only the birth, but the journey that comes after of becoming a mom and of becoming this, person that you sometimes don't even know or recognize in the mirror. It's such a challenge and we aren't really prepared for it. So I think having, some ideas of how to temper expectations or know maybe what to expect, how to prepare your body, how to learn what your body is actually meant to do when it comes to breastfeeding, knowing how your breasts work. Like that's one thing that we don't even have education about in prenatal classes, like learning how to hand express. is not talked about, or traditionally wasn't.
Yeah.
It's becoming maybe more commonplace, but still really isn't. Like, you're not often even examined. Your breasts aren't often examined during your pregnancy, and so you're not prepared for what comes after. It's just an expectation that it's natural, that it's going to be the next natural consequence. The baby's going to do all the work. And yes, it works out like that sometimes, but it doesn't always. And I mean, the stats are probably close to 70% of women will struggle with breastfeeding in some way, shape, or form. That's the vast majority of people. It doesn't mean they're all, struggling with low supply, or but they're often having nipple pain that they weren't prepared for. They certainly weren't prepared for how to latch their baby, and to make it comfortable. Our mirror neurons are triggered often in our social situations to bottle feed. So what we see growing up is often not, normal breastfeeding. It's covered with a, cover to be out in public. We're often covering up if we're breastfeeding, or we're seeing baby dolls being fed with a bottle in the crook of your arm, and you're just mimicking that. And so oftentimes what our natural inclination is to bottle feed our breast to our baby, and that really can lead to a lot of discomfort when you're trying to breastfeed your baby. Is if you are like literally taking your breast and bringing it into your baby's mouth, you can often have like nipple pain, trauma, compression, and it's simply because you're not holding your baby in the right way with tummy to mom.
That is so
some
interesting that it comes from like
things.
Them not seeing it, right? Because that is so true. Like, in the beginning, I was definitely very like cover up, cover up, cover up. And over time, I was just like, why are we sexualizing like breasts and nursing and bodies and all the things? So then I kind of swung all the way to the opposite side. I'm like, no, we need to make this way more normalized. So I don't have a baby right now, but I nursed for a long time and I just stopped covering up because I do feel like there's this weird stigma around you having to like be covered all the time. And seeing so many other cultures that don't do that, I just wonder what the ratio of like difficulty in breastfeeding would be in other cultures where it's very normal, it's very open. Everyone, nurses and sees each other nursing
a lot less.
Because that didn't even occur to me that it would be, like it even in our minds, like not knowing exactly how that goes. What are kind of the biggest issues that you see when people come into your clinic around just like kind of all things postpartum, like nursing specific, but then like what are other issues you see as well kind of going on at that same time?
A lot of mental health struggles, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. Particularly, there's been an increased rate of mental health, anxiety, postpartum depression. There's definitely an uptick in anxiety, particularly. I think there's a lot of social media use that's probably around that comes from. There's comparisonitis and looking at maybe not the greatest information online. That's just a quick TikTok that shows you how to do something that maybe not necessarily evidence based, but it's gone viral, and so people with really high followers,
you believe in it. You're like, there's millions of views. It must be. It must be true.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, there's definitely a lot of low supply, oversupply, anxiety, mental health, and I think a lot of just feeling of loneliness has also increased. There's, we're more connected than ever, and there seems to be also a feeling of loneliness. It's gotten a little bit better in the last year and a half or so, since more programs have started up again and moms are getting together and feeling more of a sense of community. But that was a really big feeling, I think, over the last 4 years, that really increased that social isolation and feeling that they were alone a lot.
What about
that's what I noticed in.
Is there some sort of connection between those? Like, so for me, I had more of like an undersupply for my first two kids, and pain and not getting the right proper latch or the proper like positioning or whatever. And with the last two, I feel like it was an oversupply. But I'm curious if there's any like difference between, or not difference, but I guess correlation between mental health and nursing. So if you are like having
There,
struggles with your nursing, does it affect your mental health and vice versa?
yes, absolutely. Feeding not going well is very well associated with mental health concerns. And but yet, when feeding goes better, and you start to turn things around, and you get good support, mental health it definitely improves. And it's not that anxiety and depression is associated particularly with breastfeeding, because you can have that with formula and bottle feeding
Mm-hmm.
as well. But that pervasiveness of anxiety that often comes into my clinic is because feeding is not going well. And that improves when they get support and feeding starts to improve. So
Mm-hmm.
getting the support for breastfeeding particularly is
Mm-hmm.
super important, and getting it in a timely manner is really important as well. And that's sometimes a challenge in a system where access can be really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's can be really, really hard to access, which we'll talk about in a minute because you have an amazing course that we're gonna share with everybody in case they're feeling that way and need some support right now. But so going back to the breastfeeding issue, and you said that there's lots of different issues, kind of oversupply and undersupply, and the positioning and all of that. Do you feel like more preparation is needed before you have baby or during baby? Like what if somebody's listening to this podcast and maybe they haven't had kids yet, or maybe they are pregnant or have just barely had children or whatever? What kind of issues can they maybe foresee happening, and how can they help support themselves before they happen?
I think understanding what your body can do and that it's meant to do this is a really important piece. There's often a feeling of their body is somehow broken, especially if you've gone through a really traumatic delivery, that somehow
Mm-hmm.
maybe you end up with an emergency C-section, like you were saying, and
Mm-hmm.
that mental anxiety and anguish and grief is really also part and parcel of the breastfeeding journey and how difficult that can be. Plus, you're recovering from a major surgery, and I think there's ways that you can't necessarily prepare yourself for that eventuality, but you can prepare yourself for making sure you know how your breasts work and how babies feed and how tiny their tummies are, and that they don't all need to be supplemented immediately if they
Mm-hmm.
haven't fed in the first 6 hours of life. They can be fed by little bits of colostrum that you hand express, and you have that power. Your body is built for this.
Mm-hmm.
And you knowing that and going into the feeding journey, that your babies are meant to do this, and that there are very simple, easy things that you can do, like learning how to latch your baby in the most logical way, where they have their ear, shoulder, hips all in a nice straight line, and they're tucked tummy to mum, and they're in a little bit of a sniffing position, and their cheeks aren't turned side to side. They're
Mm-hmm.
nice, and symmetrically attached to the breast, so that there's no drag of the breast out of the mum or out of the baby's mouth. There's simple little things that make logical sense, but until someone's actually had that teaching, they don't necessarily feel like it's all that natural or logical.
Mm-hmm.
So there are really simple little steps you can take. You can learn how to hand express, and you can learn how to latch your baby really well, but before you even go into a delivery
Mm-hmm.
room.
Yeah, I wonder
And when
why
you
this
get
isn't
that
something
baby out,
they teach you at the hospital, like when you're going through all the things and they're like, this is how you put a diaper on, or this is how, I don't know, just little things like that. Like I wish that there was more training on, and this is how nursing happens. And I think some nurses have more knowledge about that than others, but there was a lot of experiences I had where
absolutely.
I didn't get any training on that and was kind of like, wait a second, what is this whole thing? Like, how do I even do this?
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. And babies are meant to do this. They are,
Mhm.
really instinctive. If they come out and they have an unmedicated vaginal delivery, they are bright eyed and they will crawl to the breast. Like you
Yes.
put them on a mom's chest and they just crawl and get there. and they
Mm-hmm.
will do it. It oftentimes isn't that perfect of a delivery. They've had maybe
Mm-hmm.
medication, they're a bit sleepy, or they've had a very difficult entry into the world, and they've had some, maybe face or neck or jaw trauma, and that first feed is a little bit more difficult, and then they get sleepier, and so they can get behind. So knowing how to pay the insurance policy, just canned express after every feed for the first couple of days, get
Mm-hmm.
those little drops of colostrum off of the breast after the baby's fed, put it into a spoon and give them dessert. There's a really beautiful website called First Droplets, and it's by Jean Morton, and she's a physician who's been doing breastfeeding medicine for a very long time, and her website is just beautiful, and it teaches about how to hand express and get those first droplets into baby, and she speaks about how to give them dessert, and who doesn't like dessert, right? Like, so getting all those beautiful little droplets out into baby's mouth so that their gut is really well covered with that gorgeous, first milk called colostrum. It's the best antibody boost and health food on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's so good for their little guts, and it protects them from all kinds of pathogens. And it's meant to shellac the inside of their bowels and keep them protected from the outside environment and foreign proteins. And that's important. Like, that's an important first food. And there's often so much fear that this part of human physiology is going to fail, and I think that the hospital kind of works on those principles a lot of times. Is there's this fear that human biology is going to fail, and because that's where the worst cases are seen, right? Where babies have not been fed well enough and they've been readmitted, and so of course that we want to feed them first and make sure that they're well fed. But that lack of faith, I think, in human biology is a really big part of why there's sometimes a push for supplementation when maybe it isn't always necessary.
Yeah. And I think that
It comes
anxiety,
from
like
that
if
place.
you're feeling all that anxiety yourself, and then, everyone around you in the hospital is just like, we got to get this done. And then you're feeling more anxiety, how hard that is going to be able to release, to relax, to the process that needs to be happening in order for you to be able to nurse, is like, it's just opposite. It's just opposite of that.
It's fight or flight, not rest and digest.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I love what you said there. And I also want to move to when your breastfeeding journey does not turn out the way you want, right? So for me, it didn't. I tried lots of things. I, tried switching positions and whatever, and I got the support that I could find in the town that I was at, but there wasn't a lot back then. And so feeling like, initially supplementing and then having supplementing over time make it so that they had it even more difficult time latching, and eventually just didn't nurse at all. And by eventually, I mean like within 12 weeks, it was like, there's no more nursing, and he was just bottle fed. And for me, like, I didn't like talking about it with people. I was like, ooh, I don't want people to know that I'm like, feeding him with the bottle and that I'm not nursing anymore. Because I think there is this idea of like, we do know that like biologically and physiologically, like breastfeeding is so good for them and it's natural and all those things. But when it doesn't go well, or if we can't figure it out, I think that affects mental health so much too. So what would you say to, women struggling with that?
It isn't your fault. And if you haven't had the support you need, or if the support you need was there and it's still not going the way that you wanted it to, that is grief. And it's okay to grieve the loss of something that you really, really wanted. And it's normal to have that grief period when things don't go the way that you had planned. We often say the expectations versus reality. The space in between that is often where anxiety and grief and depression can live. And sometimes when we really build up this high expectation and we just crash because we haven't achieved it, that can be a really hard place to be. And without counseling and coaching or help and support, that can be a really dark and often trauma inducing place. I mean, that I still deal with trauma from having a baby that I was told had failure to thrive. Like, and that was my fault. I took that completely on myself, even though the system wasn't there to support me, and tell me at the time, 16 years ago, what to do and how to make it go better. I was just told he needed to be bottle fed and given formula because my milk was not good enough for him. And I believed it.
Me too.
And
that is exactly what they told me. And they were like, you have a week or he's going to be in the hospital. They're like, now you have to come back in 2 days. You have 5 days or he's going to be in the hospital. It was so anxiety inducing to be like, your child, and by the way, they might die. Like, it was just so, the whole rest and digest. It was like the opposite of that. Like, how are you supposed to then go home and figure out this thing if you're then feeling all this pressure of like, this is my fault that this is happening and this is affecting them in such big ways.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I love what you just said. I like wrote it down as you were saying it, because I was like, this is so, like, I think that everybody needs to hear, like, this is not your fault. If you didn't get the support that you needed, or if the support that you're getting is still not working, sometimes it doesn't work. Like, it's not always going to, happen, even if you have all the support that you need. And so just knowing that if it's not working out for you, it is not your fault. You don't need to take that on. And I know sometimes that's harder to believe than just having us tell you that, but hopefully that helps a little bit. And like you said, I think getting counseling, therapy, coaching, to help support your mental health, which is what I want to dive back into before we end, is mental health specifically, because like you mentioned, there's been an uptick in anxiety and depression, but particularly anxiety. What do you see? Like, how does that, for instance, when I was first having babies, so this was like 17 and a half years ago, I didn't know anything about depression and anxiety. And I don't know if I would have known that what I was dealing with was depression or anxiety. I had intense rage often, but I didn't know that had anything to do with depression or anxiety. And, even when the public health nurse came over and was like, were things going good? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, like, I'm tired and cranky all the time, but like, I don't think that we often know what to look for. Like, so I would love for you just to say, kind of what you notice, what maybe to look for in what depression is, what anxiety is, and when you might need to get more support.
There's a really well researched depression scale that you can do, and actually it's free online. It's called the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale, and you can actually score yourself. And it just is a scoring of how frequently within the past week you're feeling those feelings of overwhelm, those feelings of not wanting to get out of your bed, not that, and even feelings of or thoughts of self-harm, or, those are really important to recognize and to get help immediately. So if you score anything on the last question, you need to reach out for help immediately. And that is the most important thing, is keeping yourself and your baby safe. So any thoughts, intrusive thoughts, even are, that you may have no idea or plan to act on these thoughts. But scary and intrusive thoughts are also a sign of anxiety and depression. And they don't necessarily mean that you're going to be doing anything to harm yourself or your baby, but they are something that you really need to be getting in contact with supports quickly in order to make sure that you're getting the treatment that you need.
Can you explain quickly intrusive thoughts for people that maybe haven't heard that term before, that this is like their first go around? Yeah.
So those are thoughts that are just scary and might frighten you, or just kind of come into your mind immediately and then fly out and go, and you just go, oh my God, why did I think that? Why did I think that I was going to drop my baby as I was, going down the stairs? Why did I think, that maybe that somebody could come in and hurt my baby? when that kind of thought has never occurred before, that's very, very common in postpartum. And it's related to all kinds of hormonal shifts and can be underlying anxiety. But that's the type of thoughts that are that's called intrusive. That should just like you're fine, and then boom, boom, something kind of interrupts your fine sunny day like a dark cloud.
Okay, thank you. Because I know a lot of people might be kind of new to the mental emotional wellness space, so I think that is helpful. Kind of continue on what you were talking about as far as mental health and like what to look for depression and anxiety.
So it's good to do a self-screening. I would talk to a trusted friend or partner as well if you are having or thoughts that you're wondering, because that can be helpful. Sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. It has to be a trusted partner or a trusted friend. If you are feeling that you kind of just are almost emotionless at times, that can also be a sign of depression. So not having like having that flat feeling can also be a sign that you may want to reach out for help.
Okay. What about anxiety? You said that you've been seeing an uptick in anxiety, which may have to do with like social media or something like that. When people come into your office and you can tell that, anxiety is something they're dealing with, what does that usually look like?
It often looks like a lot of tracking, but sometimes we also feed into that a little bit by asking you how many times is your baby feeding or whatever, and apps are kind of pervasive. So tracking in and of itself isn't, but obsessive tracking, and being really over obsessed with very minor things, or what may be just normal infant behavior is like really a struggle to handle. Feeling very overwhelmed by all of the things there are to do, and feeling like you can't take a deep breath. Those are signs of anxiety that I see really frequently. Really over obsession with sleep can also be a sign that anxiety is creeping in, is like that control, and really trying to schedule a lot, including feeding and sleeping, which is fed into by all of the like apps and tracking and all of that in the sleep industry as well. So it all just kind of, there's this societal push towards all of these things that's just pushing moms into more and more of this like micro obsession with little things, that in the big picture actually really don't matter all that much sometimes.
Yeah, I would say that probably would be very anxiety, like increasing anxiety more. And like you said, I think social media and comparison and just having that access to so many people, but yet not feeling that deeper connection can add to that loneliness. And another thing I see is just like, there's so much access to information. There's just like constant barrage of information,
TMI.
right? Like, and like more and more and more, like, it's just like this acceleration of information. And when you have anxiety, you often have just like thoughts that don't seem like you can stop them, right? It's just like consistent, like thinking all the time. So then to have all of this access to all of this information, opinions, voices, all the time, like, how could that not make that anxiety so much worse? And, another thing that I see also is kind of like outsourcing our like own inner wisdom, right? Being like, well, they probably know better because they have a PhD or because they have 1 million followers on TikTok, or seeing so many opinions and so many voices that you're like, well, and I think the overarching belief for me was like, well, then I must not know. Like, I need to go find somebody else that does know this answer to my parenting, to my breastfeeding, to my anxiety, to my depression, because I don't have those answers inside me.
Yes. Yes. And absolutely. And I think that we don't often even give ourselves enough time and space to know what we're thinking at any given moment or what we're feeling at any given moment. And when you're exhausted and, this time of life when babies and littles are taking all of your time and your space and your energy, it is so hard to have insight even to how you're feeling. And that does sometimes feel easier to download to somebody else, like that expert, right? Like I want an answer and I want it now. Like that's, I think, part of what we are dealing with as a society is this instantaneous, there's an answer for everything. And actually sometimes there just isn't a good answer. And that's hard even for me to say as the professional that people are looking to for answers, is like, actually, this is really complicated. Like there are infinite variables on mom's side, and then there are infinite variables on the baby side. And these two infinite variables have to interact in this incredible physiologic dance that makes it so complicated sometimes to have a right answer. And so sometimes, even my, bit of OCD wants to have that answer and I don't. And sometimes that's hard, but we have to sit with it and we have to know that it's okay to not always be right. And it's okay to not always have the answers. It just is what it is. Life is 50-50, and we do have to have that, just sit with it. And that's hard to do, I think, more and more and more these days, is just having the time and patience to sit with it. And you need a lot of time and patience to sit with breastfeeding.
Yes. And when you're constantly like, anytime my kid asks a question and I don't know it, then they go ask Siri, right? And like they find a barrage of answers on the internet for every question. And so I think what you said is so spot on, of like this instant gratification of I can have an answer right now, when in reality in life, when it comes to relationships or breastfeeding or, all of the postpartum issues that we're going to be dealing with, lots of times there isn't an instant answer. It's not something that's going to come quickly. It's going to come with time, over time, and sometimes the answer doesn't come. And I think the discomfort of that is difficult. And I think we're really growing out of a society. Like if you look around, I'm on the train right now in Japan often, and I'm looking around and like everyone's on the phone all the time, or you're standing in line and everyone's on the phone all the time. And I think we're losing our capacity to just like sit and be uncomfortable and be bored and not know answers and not be entertained. And it's not just like an individual thing. This is like a global, like everybody is going through this all across the world. And I think it is a struggle. I can personally tell for me when I've been on social media too long, or when I've, been on my phone too long, or been too in that world, that I do lose out on that stillness. Like there's just something within me that feels more agitated inside. And so I think that definitely affects mental health for sure. So if you're listening to this episode and you're like, what do I do? How do I do feel like I'm dealing with that. Something that's helped me has just been doing little resets, I'm just going to put my phone away for a weekend or for a day or for a week, or I'm just going to delete social media off my phone for 6 weeks. I usually do that in the summer. And just see how you feel. And just, again, just notice, like, is this making a difference for me? How am I feeling? And I think I truly believe we're all very intuitive beings. And I think that we have way more wisdom inside of ourselves than we give ourselves credit for, in a vast area of things. So
I agree.
I would say to end, if somebody is dealing with any of these issues, either anxiety, depression, breastfeeding, kind of all the things that comes postpartum, and maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now, what kind of tip or what would you tell them to start doing, or maybe help that could be supportive for them?
I think, especially postpartum, this is probably a difficult time to learn it, but meditation, just taking maybe even 5 deep breaths, like a physiologic sigh, it has profound effects on your nervous system. So taking that deep breath in and then another sip and then blowing it out through pursed lips, that physiologic sigh can actually bring back that feeling of at least some calm and rest and digest, that side of your nervous system can be triggered so that you can take that bit of time to just breathe and get yourself out of that fight or flight state, because that's a really common place to feel when your baby especially isn't feeding well, is just constantly ramping up because they're also ramping up, and it's hard to regulate your own nervous system. But that's an important skill to learn. And that's an important skill to learn for the rest of your life. Like I'm still learning how to do that as an adult.
Yes.
Like that. Yes. And I think that's an under-recognized skill within, the human physiology. Like it is a life skill that if you just can learn to take that pause, it really, really helps with so many things. With feeding, it's particularly helpful. Babies need to be in that side of their nervous system in order to latch, in order to feed, in order to receive. And moms can actually, and dads actually have this superpower. They can do vagal stimulation for babies, just skin to skin, and having baby chest to chest and humming. Their big, deep, rumbly voices have this beautiful ability to vibrate the baby's vagus nerve and put them into a much calmer state so that they can actually feed. So dad can do that, maybe in hand to the partner. And that can be an incredible skill for the non-feeding parent to the feeding parent, is to just be able to get baby out of that fight or flight state where they're just ravenously like looking for something to latch to, and then they just calm right down if their vagal tone is increased. And so it goes both ways for moms and babies and for dads too. Like as a family, you need to be bonding and you need to be nurturing one another. And at the end of the day, if that bonded family has a well-fed baby and a well-nourished mom, and a well-supported dad, that whole family is going to do a whole lot better if they are in a state where they don't feel so fight or flight all the time. And having a well-fed baby is going to do that. And knowing that you have it in you to be able to tap into that part of your nervous system it's an incredibly empowering tool.
Oh, amen. All of that. Yes. I always tell people, like, when we're dealing with self-regulation and trying to learn that, I'm like, breath is your best friend. Breath is like the number one, and also the only thing you can bring with you, right? There's not always going to be, little doodads that you can bring with you to help you with emotional regulation, but breath you can. And meditation has been part of my journey for the last several years, and it's been so supportive for my nervous system. And even if you don't notice in the moment that it's supportive, just notice over time. I'm actually doing a little 21-day meditation challenge with my group right now, in that just notice how you feel after a few weeks of even meditating for like 1 minute in the morning, 30 seconds in the morning, and just releasing the thoughts in your mind and just slowing down your breath, which I think also helps with what we just talked about with anxiety and depression and social media and postpartum issues like that. That will be huge as well. So I love that you gave us such a simple, but also like the best tip ever, because I totally agree. So I want you to share with us a little bit about how people can connect with you, and especially if they need support and maybe there isn't the kind of breastfeeding support that you give in their area, or if there is and they're waiting for you, because I know you always have such a long wait list, what they can do in the meantime.
So in my clinic in Lethbridge, it's called Nurture Family Feeding Clinic. I actually have a website with lots of free resources on nurturefeeding.com. So you can go to that website for lots of protocols and tips and tricks. Because my wait time is 6 to 8 weeks and I can't seem to get it down, I actually have created a online video course that has pretty much all things preparation for breastfeeding that we talked about kind of at the beginning, but also troubleshoots frequently asked questions, how to use nipple shields, how to supplement your baby, how to pace bottle feed, how to get rid of a nipple shield, how to make formula. It has pretty much everything feeding related question wise that I get asked a lot in the clinic that can troubleshoot before getting to see me, because my wait time has been so long, I had to kind of think of some ways to get people the information. So people that have taken it and then come to see me have definitely found that they kind of have been able to pinpoint what the problem is, if it's a tongue tie or if they have insufficient glandular tissue and they need medication for their milk supply. They've been able to figure that out by doing the course before coming. So that's kind of like really helpful. And for other people, it's just saved them from having to come in at all. So that's been really helpful. It's been a journey of trying to figure out how to get this into people's hands and make sure it's valuable. So it's definitely been helpful for people. And you can find me online at breastfeeding.md on Instagram and Dr. Erin Appleton on Facebook. I'm not prolific on social media because I definitely find it overwhelming, but I definitely try. And there's some definite tips and tricks that you can find on my Instagram and Facebook pages.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Crystal.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to help spread this work to the world, share this episode on social media and tag me. Send it to a friend or leave a quick rating and review below so more people can find me. If you'd like more guidance on your own parenting journey, reach out.